The reason I am giving this lecture is the announcement of this conference that we are doing philosophy with no politics at all. And I asked Sergei whether he thought it was possible to detach philosophy from politics. So he said that was his opinion, and I am free to express mine. So I'm going to express my opinion. But I'm not going to start with talking abstractly of philosophy and politics. Should always be oriented to our clients, to our counselee. So I invite a counselor here, somebody you probably all know. As I said to the group before yesterday, I'm obsessed with this guy because he's a very interesting case, and he comes from a Shakespearean play, Hamlet. So Hamlet comes to me, and if I use examples of how different philosophers and philosopher counselors will treat him, I take it with humor, because I do it, a little bit as a caricature, and don't get insulted for Hegel or for Oscar Bernifier. So Hamlet is invited to come back to Denmark from Wittenberg, where he was studying philosophy, after the burial of his father, the king, also Hamlet, and the coming to power of his uncle Claudius, who married Hamlet's mother. And Hamlet is depressed, and he's very, 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 very confused. He has three groups of dilemmas. One is he has a suspicion that Claudius has killed his father, but he doesn't know. And he has several theories of knowledge which are incompatible. One is, from I assume that you all know the play. Well, the ghost told him, but he's not sure whether he can count on ghosts, whether he should believe ghosts. Second approach is empirical modern approach, that I need evidence to know whether, but he has a problem, because in Denmark Denmark is, as he says, is rotten. Something is rotten. Nobody is going to tell him, and everybody is afraid. If anybody knows, he wouldn't talk. Of course, Claudius wouldn't talk. He tries. He tries to investigate his mother, but it doesn't work, and so on. So he tried another way to direct the play and see the reactions of the audience. But he also he's not sure about that, because Hamlet or Shakespeare know the theater very well, and you know that you cannot infer too much from the reaction of the audience, because the author can manipulate them and the actors can manipulate them. So he has three theories of knowledge, and he doesn't know how to decide between them. And then he thinks that if Claudius killed his father, he has to kill him, because he has several moral theories. One moral theory is perhaps the popular one, is the of blood Freud. I hope I express it correctly. He has to revenge the death of his father. The other theory is Christian. I mean, as a Christian, you don't just kill like that. It's not. And the other conception is perhaps Stoic. We meet in the play his Stoic ideas, and Stoicism also doesn't recommend revenge as the way of life. And so he is very, very confused, and he's so confused that he considers suicide. But suicide also doesn't seem to work, because he's not sure about what he's believing of on the after and the life after. Maybe as a Stoic, he should, under such condition, commit suicide. But again, as a Christian, you see it as eternal hell, and so what to do? So he comes to me, he comes to you. And I think we have to be, to relate to what the person is concerned. We cannot come abstractly. But let him, before coming to me, let him make a sort of disappointing meeting with philosophers and counselors. So he first goes to John Locke. Why do I say John Locke? Because John Locke was the first modern philosopher that deals with madness, and you know that Hamlet is pretending to be mad. We know also from Locke, I don't know whether you know, but I know, I was very much impressed by him, that he considers madness, silly talks in parliaments, silly tea time talks, and other stupidities are coming from the same root of having unnatural associations. So he is, in a sense, the first psychologist, philosopher, psychologist, not in the direction of Spinoza, but his direction, which would later become perhaps behaviorism. Let's stop this unnatural chains of associations. So he goes to Locke, and what does Locke tell him? Well, he says, well, let's talk about you making unnatural associations, and maybe we should discuss this. And why am I thinking of Locke? Because the example of madness that is caused by unnatural associations, according to Locke, is a mourner who doesn't stop mourning, who is depressed and in melancholy and mourning and mourning and mourning. Although the dead is dead, is already not appearing in your actual experiences. And while unnatural associations are the mixing of memories with actual, or the mixing the mental experiences with external experiences, etc. So Locke is the first person that the mourning Hamlet can address to. But Hamlet says, well, it doesn't solve for me the question, how do I solve the question whether Claudius killed my father or not? Leave me alone with your theory of association. So he goes to Hegel. And what Hegel says, well, he says, first of all, you exaggerate, Hamlet. Your father was not such a perfect man, and Claudius is not such an imperfect man. The one is not God, and the other is not Satan. Okay, Hamlet perhaps ready to admit it. And then he begins to talk a bit about the dialectics of the slave and the master, and you have to recognize Claudius. Claudius has to recognize you. You have a problem, seems to have a problem with it. You are the prince, he is the king, who is a legitimate king. But you have to tune yourself to reality. Hamlet is not very happy with Hegel's advice, especially when this idea of Hegel comes from Hegel's speculations about what is going on in the mind of the baby. This idea would taken later, but Melanie Klein, the psychologist, and he says, I am not a baby, I am a student of philosophy, and your philosophy doesn't convince me. So he tries to go to Nietzsche. And Nietzsche, or perhaps Heidegger, and they tell him to be more resolute. He is not resolute enough. He has to decide what. Yes, he says, but I cannot decide. I cannot decide if I don't know if Claudius killed my father. I don't know whether I should kill Claudius, and I don't know how to deal with it. I am all confused on your blah blah blah. Doesn't help me. So I go to a psychologist, and you guess what? It's a psychoanalyst, and you can guess what a psychoanalyst is going to tell him. Okay, Hamlet, the truth is that you wanted to kill your brother and you wanted to sleep with your mother, And that's what interferes with your possibilities to get over the learning. So Hamlet is saying, okay, let's assume that I spent some 10 years with you and overcame my Oedipal conflict and still don't know whether Claudius killed my father and still don't know what I should do with Claudius. So he goes to a behaviorist. And the behaviorist say, as I told you yesterday, that, oh, this is a problem of procrastination. I mean, postponing decisions and actions tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. This is taken from Hamlet. And you don't decide. So maybe some behaviorist training will help you. So Hamlet think, what am I postponing? Killing? Suicide? What is what I am? It's like if the psychologist told him, like, in the film The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, when Eli Wallach says to Clint Eastwood, you want to shoot? Why are you talking so much? But I don't know whether I should shoot. I don't know. This is my question. So what else? He goes to Oscar Boniface. And Oscar Boniface tell him, hey, guy, you are looking for certainty, a crazy quest for certainty. But since at least the American pragmatists, we know that the quest for certainty is useless. Agnes tells him, what do you want of me? I want to do the right thing. In order to do the right thing, I have to know whether he killed my father or not. If I cannot, then I don't want to kill him for them. What do you mean? Without certainty, I don't want to kill him. So he goes to logical center oriented therapy, like Ellis. We can think of other. What Ellis says, oh, you have masturbacy problems. You think of in terms of must. You must kill him. You must not kill him. Why don't you change the modality? You say, I want to kill him, but I cannot. Or I want to know whether he killed my father, but you cannot. You don't say, leave the must. Change the modality. Hamlet tells him, well, I'm not interested in grammar. I'm not in modal logic. I want to know whether to kill or not to kill Claudius. This is what bothers me. What else? I'll finish with deep philosophy, like Ran Lahav suggests. And he tells, well, think of other things. Think of the bigness of God or being or the experience. Why are you bothered in such trivialities of mundane problems like killing the killer or something like that? Go elsewhere. And maybe the Stoic would also recommend him a similar kind of thing. But Hamlet, it doesn't help him. He said, I'm not egocentric. I am a philosopher. I studied philosophy. I tend to reflect about it, but now I have an urgent problem of what? What to do. I want to know what to do, and I cannot decide. And in the meantime, while I'm not deciding, I'm causing the death of everybody else by errors. For Hamlet is a tragedy of errors. Everybody dies there, but just like that, useless and senseless death. It's not no meaning at all. And then he think, but I have a problem here, and the problem is, what is it? It is a political problem, because Claudius is the king and I am the prince. So leave it at this stage, and let's ask why do philosophers think, or some philosophers think, that politics can be detached from philosophy, or philosophy can be detached from politics. What kind of reasons they can have? So you have historians who say that when politics get involved, philosophy get involved in politics, is just cause harm. Take the example of Rousseau, and think of Robespierre and his gang. If there were not Rousseau, there wouldn't be such a terror. They wouldn't feel legitimize the killing that they were killing. You have psychologists who say that, like Freud, for instance, who was interested in political questions, also had some socialist sympathies, but he believed that it's not going to solve the deep problem of mankind, because the deep problem of mankind are not solved by politics. The deep problem of mankind is, for Freud at least, the clash between his instincts and civilization. So I think that the clash between instinct and civilization is a very, very political question, and the proof is that various psychologists or psychoanalysts had different opinions about this clash idea that comes from Nietzsche, this clash of civilization with instincts. And if you see, on another occasion, I'll talk about this, the difference between Freud and Jung, for instance, and the fact that Jung for a while worked for the Nazis. So it's very, very, the question, how do you treat civilization and what do you mean by that, is very, very political. Maybe you know that the prophet of behaviorism in America, Skinner, wrote a book, Utopia, of a state where the country is run by behavioral psychologists, and they condition everybody to, and what the principle for this condition, what yes and what no, believing that he believed that everything can be done by conditioning, the survival of civilization. So what Skinner know, what he meant by civilization, I don't really know, but he knew that civilization is something important that one should relate to. Okay, so we have this psychologist position. We have religious thinkers that think that there are things above politics. Politics is too small for them, and they have to you have to think of God, of being, whatever. But there were other there were other religious thinkers who think differently and think that religion is very much involved with politics, including St. Augustine, who is perhaps the case of the more abstract and more spiritual philosopher, Christian philosopher. On the other hand, he did as a bishop, took political actions quite specific, including persecutions of the heretics. So let's go to philosophers. There are different group of philosophers that think that philosophy is irrelevant. Let's start with the positivists, the logical positivists, who thought that philosophy should deal with logic, with methodological criteria, with criteria on higher level, and politics, which is connected with emotions and material interest, is not a matter of philosophy. And yet, this very positivists, whom we perhaps tend to see as very cynical politically, were not cynical at all. And some of them, they were mainly in Germany and in Austria, left their country because of, not because they were Jews, they were not Jews, but they didn't identify with the Nazis and left it for ideological reasons, and they are very, very politically very, very conscientious, and that it's not true to think that if you are a logical positivist, you don't care about political things. It's not true. So let's go to Popper or Hayek. They say that perhaps not every philosophy is bad, but every dogmatic philosophy is bad, because take the example of he took the example of Plato and Hegel and Marx, and see how dogmatic they were and what kind of regime were or would have been constituted on their theories, very undemocratic, very oppressive, etc., etc. And but again, Popper was against certain kind of philosophy, but of course his philosophy is very, very much interwoven with political considerations for the free society, what he considers as free society. So, and there is another kind of people who say let's separate philosophy from politics. It depends that they have some philosophers that they admire very much for some of their ideas, but they do not like their political behavior. The most notorious case is Heidegger, but I think that Nietzsche too was his political choices. I mean, he wasn't active politically, but what the implications of his anti-democratic way of thinking was interpreted by some as very, very, very threat to open society. But some ideas of Nietzsche were very, very tentative, very tempting ideas. So the idea was, let's separate between philosophy and the moral ideas or the political behavior or choices of the politicians, and let's say this is irrelevant. I don't think it's totally irrelevant. I think that saying so is expressing somehow disrespect for these philosophers who's saying that politically, well, he was too naive, he was too there, he knew what he was doing, and maybe we should examine whether his behavior, it's not logical conclusion, but it's somehow implied by their philosophy. Let's re-examine their philosophy, not just say, okay, I like the philosophy and I don't like his behavior. This is there are other examples, of course, but on the other side, like I don't know, Sidney Hook in the United States, who was cooperating perhaps with McCarthy. So you can find philosophers that you accept some of the ideas and you wonder about their behavior, but if you expect from a philosopher to be somehow committed to what he theoretically say, and he behaves in a very strange way, maybe you have to consider what he theoretically says too, not only. So I don't think this separation is, and say all this saying done, I don't have the chutzpah to tell a philosopher who lives under political oppression that they should behave like this or like that, when I am not myself I don't know enough about the conditions under which they live, and I certainly don't know how would I behave in their place. I think that philosophers sometimes say, well, I don't know. Let's be honest about it. Most of us haven't experienced working under political threat, and we don't know how we would behave. So I hope I would be able to be a hero, but I don't know. But so I think these are the reasons why some philosophers try to detach philosophy from politics and detach philosophy especially from philosophical counseling. But what do we do if the if the counselor comes to us and he's bothered by political conduct, he is part of a political situation, and his problem is part of this political situation. What should we do in such a case? So I go back to Hamlet, and would like to hear your opinion too. But I think that one of the things that I could have told Hamlet is I believe that philosophical counseling is concerned with attempt to change perspective or to widen the horizon of choices that client have to it. And I think that if I had to deal with Hamlet, I don't think I could help him very much to solve his dilemmas about knowledge or about advantages, because belonging to the Renaissance, and I'm entering to the world of Hamlet and the world of the Renaissance and the inner contradiction of intellectuals at that time, I don't know whether in that time they could really settle the problem of different kind of knowledge or different kind of behavior towards being the son of the revenge or not revenge for your father. I don't know whether I have the tools to help him in his world of, in his climate of opinions, climate of idea, to come with 20 or 21st century solutions and tell him, hey, Hamlet, make this and make distinction. This is not Hamlet's world. And when I work with a client, with a counselor, I have to enter his world and to help him look for a solution or think of a solution starting from the world he lives in. So I would perhaps, you can criticize me, but perhaps ask him, Hamlet, you are the prince. And as far as I know, in Shakespeare's dramas, the question whether the king is a legitimate king or not a legitimate king is a very, very central question in many of Hamlet's plays. So you know about Shakespeare plays. So you know about Shakespeare, he made you know. So what's your opinion about, I mean, if you say that something is rotten in Denmark, and if you see Fortinbras, he is a prince like you, he's Prince of Norway. You see him going to Poland to war and say, well, he's going to kill some thousands of Polak, and I don't know about a single person. Your father fought against, you tell us that your father fought against his father. And he's a prince, he made a political decision to follow, to be the king after his father's death. And you, what's the matter with you? I mean, didn't you think about the possibility that you are the prince and that you are perhaps the legitimate king? Or more important, I don't going to judge whether he should be a king or whether he fits to be a king. But the question, isn't the interest of Denmark more important than your interest in the question of revenge? Is it, if you want to be a moral person, a responsible person, maybe you have responsibility for Denmark and not only for yourself? The idea is to turn him, I mean, your question is a political question because you are going to kill a king, you are yourself perhaps a king. You cannot decide like that. You have to take other things into consideration. So I wouldn't tell him that precisely because I don't tell my counselor what to do and how to think. I just I share with them the perspectives of on the problem of other philosophers and other issues, and let them see that there are other ways to think of the issue And maybe the issue of revenge is not the central issue. Although I don't know how to solve for him the issue of revenge or identifying the true killer and so, I can change his view to think about more general things. So in this case, thinking about Denmark and not only about Hamlet. And he's very, very self-centered person. He's obsessed with this question of there, but I'm not, it's not that I have a theory about obsessed persons, or I have a theory about what make people obsessed with unnatural association of ideas like Locke or other stories. But I think that he thinks of his problem and he thinks it's either A or B. And I say, let's say, there are other possibilities. There is perhaps D. And so what's your opinion about D? And what's for philosophically, on the philosophical level? And perhaps your dilemma is a pseudo dilemma, because if you don't know, if you cannot know, and you know that you cannot know whether Claudius killed the king or not, so maybe it's not a metaphysical impossibility to know, but practically you cannot know. So maybe you don't deal with it. Maybe you deal with other things. And in this case, I lead him to politics because politics is a situation of Hamlet. It's a very political situation. And the question is, in this respect, if I see the things like you are in a social situation and political situation, that there are other questions that are relevant to you, to where you are and what your responsibilities are, and these cannot be detached from social involvement or from political questions. The question is, how do I act as a counselor without imposing on him my political position? And I think that the tendency of philosophers to say, well, I don't deal with, for some philosophers to say, I'm not dealing with politics, I'm not dealing with religion, I'm not dealing with this, and it's very dangerous because we have our political and other opinions, and if we are not aware about it and not transparent about it, we may sneak them in half consciously or some very much consciously, I don't know. And I think there should be a forum of philosophical counseling where we deal with such difficulties and with other difficulties on meta level of what are our responsibilities and where are our limits, and where we should be careful or how we should be careful. And I think that, this idea of proposing to Hamlet to think of Denmark instead of himself just occurred to me while writing this paper. I don't know what I would do practically in the, but it occurs. Ideas occur to us by talking with people, and we should have some self-control, but not only self-control, the possibility to discuss with others. Am I right? Am I doing the right thing? Am I involving myself in unknowingly in responsibility that I don't know? If the stupid psychologist who sent him to kill his not to procrastinate, but yalla, go and kill the king, I don't want to push him to make a revolution, because it's not my job to push him to make revolutions, but maybe to make him aware of other possibilities of thinking of his problem. So your opinions. Yes, please, Peter.
Hello. Thank you for that presentation. Very interesting indeed. I mean, may I suggest sort of dividing up the ways in which we approach the question of where politics and philosophy meet or not meet. So we might just straightforwardly say that that there's obviously a political context, for instance, in which any philosopher or any person that we're dealing with can find themselves in, and that will be different from whether or not we should be political in our practice. That makes sense. So a lot of what you were saying was about what the philosophers would say, and of course, since Nietzsche, there's been an awful lot about how the philosophers can't be taken out of the context in which they're in. So, you know, Kant is representing some sort of Protestant thinking in his philosophy. That's the religious context. So et cetera, et cetera. So we can always see the kind of history, the art history approach of what the political context is and how we analyze it and how we think about it. But that would be a different question from whether or not we should be political in our practice. So that's just two suggestions. Maybe there are other ways in which we can divide up how we think about philosophy and politics. I don't know what you think about that, or if you have anything to say about those divisions, those distinctions.
I think that your distinction is very important, but it may happen that in a certain counseling situation, these political questions come to the fore. Are not when I am inciting Hamlet to think about Denmark instead of himself, but the counselor himself or herself can raise a problem if she is acting under political pressure, for instance, and has to make decision. If she is an active feminist, for instance, or if she is an Arab in Israel and has her problem to deal with this very complex situations, I cannot avoid relating to such questions. So the question
isn't there a sense in which that's a different question though? So the fact that I find myself with clients who are in a political, religious, or any other context, that's just going to be a truism. That doesn't mean that philosophy and politics are intrinsically linked. It just means that philosophy is intrinsically linked with the world and all the different contexts in which it finds itself. But to say that the question of whether or not philosophy and politics are bound up with each other is a separate question from that, in terms of, you know, thinking about practice and philosophy. So, I mean, I can consistently say that there's a political situation in which my client is, together with other situations. But that's a different question of whether the philosophy I'm now going to use to address all that is itself intrinsically linked with political aspect.
Okay, if you mean by using the connection is let me indoctrinate him to be Marxist or liberal or whatever, no, I don't think I have to. I'm very much suspicious of philosophy getting mobilized for political purposes. And
so then we get to the interesting question of the unconscious biases of the facilitator. So the facilitator may well not, but if the facilitator has unconscious political biases, that's still a separate question from whether philosophy is. So we may well be saying that the individual facilitator is always political, but I don't think that, again, is still not saying that philosophy and political are tied up with each other intrinsically. So yeah, that's another important distinction.
I agree with you that this is an important distinction, but in practice, there are situations where, also as a teacher, not only as a counselor, and in philosophy we want to let the person think for herself, and I think that this is my duty to encourage the person to think for herself and not accept any authority. And yet, I may be biased, and the question how to deal with this bias and not to mix it in a wrong way is a very, very important question. Theoretically, there are different fields, but practically, I am sometimes in conflicts, and I might sometimes confuse or mislead my counselee, and I would like that we discuss such things and be aware of such dangers, and consult each other of how can we avoid. Should we be transparent? Should we be transparent? Should we be indifferent? What should be? What is? How do we deal with this?
So may I quickly ask one last question, just because I want to sort of get to the meat of this, the nub of it. So if it's the case that we can accept that there is some sort of political context that the clients find themselves in, and if we agree that there's also the possible of the political context and biases of the facilitator themselves, whatever they may be, do you think, and of course we might say there's a political context for all the philosophers in the history of philosophy that they were in. So those aspects of philosophy can all be sort of, we can sort of tidy them up a little bit, say, right, okay, they've all got a political aspect to them. Now the question is the practice of doing philosophy itself, philosophizing together dialectically, is that political? That's my question to you. Is that bit political? I'm now putting aside all those other aspects, and I want us to focus just on that bit.
I'm afraid that yes, that there are different political preference or political orientations that in some way direct, admittingly or not admittingly, direct the practitioner in certain ways and not in other ways. If somebody is a Stoic, for instance, in a kind of avoidance of such, I think I see Stoicism as a kind of avoidance of some responsibilities, social responsibilities or responsibilities to the other, self-centered way of thinking in a way. Also, people who seek to be saints or seek to be in a religion, I think that they also Plato with his ideas of the philosopher becoming a perfect person, perhaps, is self-centered, or Socrates is self-centered.
So am I right in understanding you to mean that schools of thought are inherently political?
In a way, yes. I mean, politically in that sense, yes, that whether they are individual and his well-being in this world or in the next.
Is philosophical dialogue always representing a school of thought then?
Not necessarily. Look, my approach to philosophy that I as a student got stuck between different schools of thought and was born into a world of debates. And my idea is that debate is a very, very important thing. And but the debates between positivist and Hegelian or phenomenologists or whoever was in my career were also imbued in ethical and political questions, and also attitude to religion. I don't think we are free from that.
Thank you very much indeed. Sorry to take up so much time.
I take it as a problem, not as a solution.
Thank you.
Laura.
Yeah, hi, Carmen.
Hi. I was thinking about, I think this is very interesting. Most of the people I work with in philosophical practice, and which I did counseling too when I was in that, are politically engaged. And then politics come up all the time. And I had the vision, I had the idea that in philosophical counseling, in the classic or most common or mainstream philosophical counseling, the conversation is the conversation is always directed to the person, to the personal aspects, and does do not. The counselors often, it seemed to me, do not enter in their politic interest of the politic interest of the counselee or of the person who is talking with you, people you work with in philosophical practice. So I think, what do you think about it? I always try to follow the line of thought of the final, the line of thought of the person who is talking with me, who most of the time, of course, does not think as I do, but I try to follow their political interest and try to work on that and not to focus on their personal, their more psychological, personal dilemmas, which also appear, no? But which may not be at that time the most important aspect. What do you think about it?
No, I didn't understand you precisely. The people who came to you were concerned in their personal issues or in political issues?
In political, but when people are politically engaged, both come together.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot difference. It comes together. They start maybe talking about something personal, but then it is related to their political activity, and or the other way around. They come to you talking about some political activity, and then some personal aspect comes up. But they are because there is passion in politics, and the passional aspect, if you don't follow what they want in the political passion, then you lose the personal aspect too. So you have to, I think that's how I deal with it. You have to follow what they say, and then there is, of course, sometimes there is a collusion, because sometimes they want things that are not ethically right, or that collusion with their own personal views, and they are not aware of it. That also happens.
Yeah, so you have a more general problem that when the counseling ethical moral view is different than yours, and what do you do with it? And we meet it on the personal and on the social or political level, whatever. We meet it. So when what I'm talking about is I didn't relate now to the reluctance that a client counselor can raise in me when his ethical preference are very, very different than mine, and I have to deal with it. But what I meant by politics now is not precisely to be a communist or to be a liberal or to be for that party or for that party. And I know that in Latin America, people are very much concerned at the universities with philosophical questions. But the main question, do you deal with yourself and when you are the center, or do you take into account that there are other people in the world and you have other responsibilities besides your responsibilities to yourself? That's what interests me as a philosopher. I think that psychology is biased by the interest, putting the interest on the individual and his petty or not petty problems and his issue. And I think this was a choice which was consciously made by Freud, for instance, that he decided to deal with personal problems and with archaeology of whether you loved your mother or so forth in your childhood. And very few psychologists are tuned to, like, what his name was, the flea from, his name went out. Very few were interested in general problems, in social problems and such. And I think that as philosophers, we shouldn't be from the beginning deal with that, well, the I, the person, the self is important and the others are not important. And in this question, hey, Hamlet, don't think only about yourself, think widely, or to widen his, and this is of course also a moral question, but how do I deal with when I have a client whose preference are very different than mine and maybe too different than mine? I'll try to be transparent, to tell him where I stand and ask him whether he allows me to challenge him. But I am not going to tell him how to think and what to think. But maybe there are some cases that I wouldn't be ready to work with. I must admit that too. For instance, I don't think that Freud would work with an anti-Semite. I met it when I was in a clinic when an Arab was complaining, and I think hypocrite social workers told him that, well, you should come over, he wants a contact with you, etc. There is a problem when you are a minority and somebody hates you and so forth, and don't tell him blah, 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 that this is a way of making contact with you. And I told this Arab guy that, to my mind, if he doesn't want to work with a client who tells him he hates all the Arabs, I think you have the right not to work with, a moral right not to work with such a person. And especially as a student, it doesn't have to. He was a student to go into all this in his practice, and the client too. When it was in a mental health hospital, well, his ideas, I'm not responsible, but he doesn't have to work with somebody whom he hates. It's not a place to correct their political opinions, but. I think that I have, as philosopher, I have enough tools to see, to talk with a client that I don't accept his ideas, still to show him that there are various ways of thinking and possibilities of thinking otherwise. And I want to have a forum where I can consult with other philosophers. I think that we don't always know how to solve these problems, and the possibility of exchanging ideas, and not everybody who is working for himself. I think that this is important. I think that psychologists have this kind of foray for discussing difficulties, and philosophers should have them too.
We have one more question, please.
Hello, hi.
Hi.
A short question. In your opinion, what is the role of ideology in the relationship between philosophical counseling and politics?
I don't know what you mean by ideology. Ideology can be what Marx meant, which everything is an ideology, or ideology can be somebody interpreted as
perhaps
not really philosophical, but some.
Perhaps the personal ideology inside the politics view or perspective.
Well, we all have our political and ethical biases. I mean, we have our positions, and from the point of view of neutrality, it's a bias, but I don't think it. And I think that we should be aware of it, and I think we should explore how much it interferes with our work and whether it's good or not or bad or should be neutral. I think it's an issue for discussion. It's not that I have a solution, but I think it's an issue for discussion, and saying that we are doing philosophy doesn't protect us from being aware of our biases and consider which biases we should follow and which biases we should control when we are with other persons. And I think that in psychology they are not much aware of it, and in psychology there is a much psychological bias when they tell you to be realist and accept reality. What do they mean by it? If you ask Nietzsche, he wouldn't recommend accepting reality as they do. I mean, in every, you mentioned, Andre, self-realization. So self-realization can be on the account of somebody else. When the mother chooses to self-realize herself as a pianist, say, and she perhaps abandon her children. So self-realization is not only what I do with myself, but who pays for it. So it is a social problem and not only personal problem. It is a moral problem and not only psychological. It is, in that sense of considering others, it's a political question too. For me, politics is in the general sense, is remembering that there are other people in the world. And it's also the question when I deal with a client who I think that he's going to harm another person by his behavior, the question to what extent, well, I think I should bring it to his awareness, but the question of my responsibility is sometimes very, very acute in such cases. And I think we should be aware of it and not just tell people, okay, become a Stoic or become a Buddhist monk, and what about the others that depend on you, or I don't know. And I think we should bring into consideration these aspects too. So it's not politics in the sense that I am for Biden or I am for Trump, which is relevant because Trump is a phenomenon that it's a kind of a poison, I think. I hope you agree with me that something very wrong in the fake news and all this kind of. But still, it's not a question whether I'm voting for this president or for that president, but the question of calling our counselor to take in consideration, to ask themselves whether they want to take into consideration only themselves or enlarge the circle. It's a matter of debate, and I think it should be put on the table.